Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to have you with us today for our G21 Funders Forum. And my name is Pat Burke. I'm with Philanthropy Australia, and very pleased to be asked to give you a bit of a philanthropy update today and try to lead this session in some way. And then we'll have a bit of Q&A at the end as well. I'll go to the next slide to move on. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the past, present, and emerging traditional custodians and elders of the lands on which we work. We also accept the invitation in the Uluru Statement from the Heart to walk together with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. And I am dialing in from my desk in the Bayside, as I mentioned, the chilly Bayside, and we're on the lands of the Boonwurrung people here and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So I'd like to invite you to add in the chat the lands that you're on so that we can share that. And as we go through, this is the agenda, and as we go through, I've got about 15 minutes to give you an update on this, and then you can see the proceedings. We've got, I'll talk for about 15 minutes about what's happening in the world of philanthropy, and then you'll hear from Emily Wellard-Baring from Perpetual to give you an update on their grant opportunities and process. Then Percy Baxter Charitable Trust, Austin Patterson and Jill Hill will tell you a bit about what they're up to. We'll hear from Will Beresford at Equity Trustees to understand their grant opportunities and process as well. So we're trying to leave a goodly amount of time for questions, but as you come up with questions in between bites of your sandwiches, please type it into the chat function, and we'll look forward to having a really robust conversation after we get through the presentations. So this slide, just to give you a little bit of an update on what's happening in the world of philanthropy. This was developed by Christian Seibert on our team, one of our policy gurus, and it just gives you a little bit of a look of what the pressure's been for charities. Obviously, you're very aware of the pressure that's happened since last year. There was an RN breakfast show with Fran Kelly talking about it. There's been quite a lot of conversation in the media and in our worlds. And if you look at the bar chart, the main one on the right, analyzing each of the giving segments in Australia, looking at the main factors influencing their levels of support, the estimate last year was that total giving would fall by around 7.1%. After rising by almost 5% over each of the previous years. And I may have covered a bit of this last year when we came together, and we're just dealing with the middle of COVID-19, and here we are fully a year later. The larger effect from the current crisis is likely to be felt in 2021, where we're sitting right now. When giving then, they said, was estimated to fall by a further about 11.9%, back to levels not seen since 2012. And that chart from J.B. Weir gives you a breakdown of the money across all the different structures, from corporates to charitable trusts, public ancillary funds, private ancillary funds, bequests, individuals. So it's interesting. There's a report that came out that we'll share in the chat function with you a bit later, but the J.B. Weir NAB Charitable Giving Index came out in July, and it gave quite a look backward on what we've been through since the pandemic started, and also captured some current information from NAB's customer base. And they said, in an extremely timely addition to the philanthropy data set, NAB have been able to compile their charitable giving index to December 2020, providing a valuable view on the extent of the fall and relevant performance for different causes. So that data was through last year and wasn't published until mid this year. So giving peaked in February 2020. This is some of the information that I gave you last year. But one of the bits of good news that I'd like to highlight for you is that normally recovery from a philanthropic downturn is swift. And that's been, there's evidence behind that from historically, whenever we've watched an economic downturn, philanthropy comes back quickly. Cause areas that perform differently with health and international aid performing well during the overall decline, while smaller falls were seen in environment and animals post bushfires and in religion. The largest falls were, I think, as most of you would expect, were in the arts, education, social services, and development housing. The trends have been markedly different across the donor segments. The CGI highlights the fall in mass market giving during COVID, while previous JB Weir analysis has shown that high net worth giving and corporate community investment both grew strongly in 2020. And I think the figure around corporate giving was a 30% increase in Australia. So that's really exciting for those of us that are in the world of the nerds like me in the world of philanthropy, to see that there's new money coming into the system and more corporate giving, which has so much potential. So I want to give you a bit of positive news in that case. And longer term trends, the broader longer term trends of widening income and wealth inequality in Australian society. There's some differing economic outcomes in that area, and similar results have been seen in the USA during 2020, when foundation giving rose 17% against individual giving that was about 2.2%. Couple more things. The granting opportunities platform up here that Philanthropy Australia was in partnership with Australian Communities Foundation. That platform is still available, just to let you know that tool is there. And it's easily, you can go in through our website or ACF's directly to get to it. And it's a good place to find opportunities both for funders and for grant seekers. And this slide actually gives you just a bit of an overview of some of the things that occurred as a result of COVID-19. We had peer networks to bring all of us together more often to discuss and support each other and living in isolation. There are a number of people in this Zoom room too that participate in our peer networks, and it's been just a way to keep ourselves buoyant during this challenging time. And the Assistant Minister for Finance, Charities and Electoral Matters, they've been involved behind the scenes if you've missed some of it. So there is support out there. Call to action. So last year, PA put out a philanthropy response to the COVID-19 crisis. I would have spoken about it a bit at the time. The great thing about it is it was just a call to action and gave direction to philanthropists on how to behave and how to do the right thing and adjust and be flexible. And this is the pledge. This is on our website at PA. Many of you would have seen it, and some of you will even be on the next slide where the name of the individuals and organizations who got behind the pledge were there. But these are the things that we led by saying this is what philanthropy should be doing to support the charitable sector during these challenging years. These are the signatories, from large to small, to individuals, influential foundations, to very private ones and smaller ones. And the list is growing. I had a call yesterday from yet another corporate foundation that said, can I get on the list? So they're still interested in being part of it and following those rules. Now this slide is bright red. The response to that pledge and how funders were changing their practice was something that we measured across 3 surveys. And when I met with you last year, I think we might have had, not sure if we had that second August 2020 data in yet, but the June data has recently come in. The first survey had 104 responses. You can see it's dropped off a bit, but still enough to be representative of how philanthropy is responding. So to the question, did you change your granting approach in response to COVID-19? And you can see survey 1, 2, 3, those are the results, and the yeses have held fairly firm at the mid 80% almost approaching 90%. And that's really good news. As many of the funders have changed from being flexible to funding capacity to just having deeper conversations with their grant recipients. And so now as we move out of the response phase and turn our minds to recovery, what are you considering in terms of any longer term changes to your grant making practices and approaches? And as you all would guess, part of Philanthropy Australia's remit is to teach, not only encourage people to give, but to give in the best possible way. And a lot of our thought leadership and training is around improving practice and approach. So we still have a pretty strong percentage, you know, above 45% of funders that are improving on a long-term basis, and that's really good news. Some of the changes, if any, that they've maintained going into 2020, I won't read all the way through it, but I think the first item with 61% should be music to anyone's ears. Anything in our lives that cuts back on administrative red tape and reporting requirements is good news from where I sit. And I know it's important to do what's required, but not any more than that, as we all sit in front of our screens 24/7. So bringing forward payments, schedules, suspending and realigning regular grants programs. That's my doorbell. I'm sure something's being delivered. We'll ignore that. Many, and where my cursor is, there were a number of new dedicated C19 grants programs as well. And many of those are still in place. So a lot of good things changed along the way. This is, so for any of you that are members of Philanthropy Australia, you would have seen that we've been talking about a blueprint to grow structured giving. And this is, it's really going to shape our behavior and a lot of our work, our strategic plan over the next 4 years, because we are aiming to double structured giving by 2030. And we'll measure on an ongoing basis, and it's going to be across several areas that we encourage the growth of giving in this country and in different ways. So better frameworks, we'll work across policies, regulations, and incentives to grow philanthropy and defend and extend. Deeper engagement with policymakers, government, elected representatives. So that's the intro of it. This is, I might put a link to this into the chat function too, for those of you that don't have it, but it's a bit of a wonderful roadmap to keep us on track to grow giving. So we've all heard about the great intergenerational wealth transfer, and if that's harnessed for philanthropy, this could supercharge giving in Australia by 2030. So that's an option, and there's work in place to with advisors and intermediaries to try to make sure that customers who are in a position to inherit or be more charitable are aware of what the options are. And it isn't always a structured vehicle. It's often giving directly to charities that they support. The second bullet, corporate giving's at an all-time high, as I mentioned before, and we want to harness that, and we can build on that momentum. The proportion of Aussies who give has been trending down, as you see, for 15 years, and arresting this decline could save quite a bit in lost donations by 2030. So there's thought about running something along the lines of like a slip, slop, slap campaign that's really around encouraging Australians to be giving in every way, you know, from childhood on up. And so it's a bit of a long bow on behavior change. So interesting conversations and research on that I look forward to being part of. The fourth bullet, number of wealthy Australians is increasing, but the proportion of wealthy Australians who donate is decreasing. Go figure, I just don't understand. So lifting the percentage of wealthy donors will have a dramatic effect, and some of our work will be around trying to convert them. Research shows that attitudes towards giving are established early in life, hence the idea of you know, a campaign that is around behavior change to create more generosity. And we are, and I think you all would know this intuitively or have heard it, but we, as a nation, we just kick goals in the world of volunteering. But here we are in COVID, and so many of our volunteers can't actually do that. So, and volunteering, there's research that shows that individuals volunteering also often leads to their being charitable as well and actually giving. So that's part of it. So community responses to the bushfires reinforce the increasing importance of community and place-based philanthropy. And that is Geelong, that's your community. Some of the policy priorities, there's a lot on this slide, but you can see some of what will be happening. We want to remove barriers to donating excess superannuation. They're talking about looking at a living legacy trust structure. Whether they can get that across, who knows, but it would be quite transformative, and cutting red tape. Those are the three that are circled. We're and enablers under the bottom red line. They're going to form a coalition of the giving. I love that phrase, but a cross-sector group to drive, champion, and lead these initiatives. And we'll provide the support at PA with other organizations and a collaborative effort. It will be a multi-sectoral approach. And this, I'm getting to the end. These are some of our offerings right now, that some from last year that we started under leadership and advocacy. The pledge, as I mentioned, there were policy recommendations, the blueprint, but this work is ongoing, and some of the connecting and peer groups that have formed over this past 18 months have changed quite a bit because the needs have changed, and we're finding people are connecting more than ever and more than comfortable connecting in this way, and needing it more than ever because of feeling isolated. Data and Insight Foundation Maps is still growing. There are other data sets we're looking at as well to provide great resources for fund seekers and grant makers as they're doing their due diligence. So watch that space. That's something we're working on long term. Professional learning, we've got webinar series. Our conference this year was a cracker, and the webinars will be offered again from that conference around the Christmas holiday period. So we'll come out with that. And then the awards, wish we could have done that. I think it'll be just a little too soon to meet face to face, unfortunately, but that will be conducted online. And that's always a celebration of really great case studies for philanthropy. So it's not just about who wins, it's about what they've done and why they're being celebrated for best practice philanthropy. Just quickly then, what's coming up next? There's on October 14th, there's a webinar I'd like to draw your attention to because it really ties in with everything I've just been talking about. And it's available online just after lunchtime on October 13th at 1 o'clock. And leading philanthropist from last year, Carol Schwartz, AO, will reflect on the growing inequalities and injustices across our communities and the important role of philanthropy in addressing these issues. Our CEO, Jack Heath, will share a progress update on our strategy at that stage. We're in the middle of bedding that down, and it should be ready to launch at that stage. So that'd be interesting for you to hear what that's about and our role in shaping the future of philanthropy. So we'll also be joined by Anthony Kavanaugh on our board, who's the head of Gambina, and Joe Srinsky, of one of our Sydney board members, along with Caroline Stewart, to discuss the road ahead. So that'd be one worth joining in if you can. And I think now we will go to Emily, and I haven't even checked the clock. How am I doing, Sam? So at this stage, I will stop sharing, and Emily will jump in, and we'll say hello to all your faces for a sec or two.
Beautiful.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Pat. I'll share my screen. Can someone give me a nod if you can see the big blue Perpetual symbol? Fantastic. Look, thank you, Pat, for that introduction and that overview of philanthropy and where we're at as a country. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Jill, to Austin, to Gail, to Cynthia, and to everyone at the Geelong Regional Funders Network for putting on this event and for inviting me along. It's my absolute pleasure to come and speak to you today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm calling in from, the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. Look, today I really want to provide a really high level outline and an overview of Perpetual's Impact Philanthropy Application Program. I'm sure you all know it by its gorgeous acronym IPAP. I apologise for that from the outset. But we don't have time today to go too deeply into the detail of IPAP. But what I really want to do is just provide you with the key details about how the program works, about what Perpetual is looking for in a really strong application. So I hope to give you a good grounding in how we work and what we're looking for. But I guess my key message also is that for further detail, for example, applications, for how-tos, for question explanations, and a video which literally takes you through the application question by question, I really do suggest that you jump on our website. There's a huge amount of resources available, and we'll be adding to them in the lead up to IPAP 2022, which opens on October 25th. So please do go there and have a little bit of a look around. Okay, so to start with, a little bit about Perpetual. We're a 130-something-year-old trustee company that manages over 1,100 charitable trusts, foundations, and endowments across Australia, with a significant proportion of those concentrated here in Victoria. We manage over $3.9 billion in philanthropic funds, and we grant around about $100 to $110 million into the charitable sector annually. So what this means for you is that we have an absolute wealth of experience and expertise in both managing charitable trusts, but also in grant making. So our grant making program is as I mentioned, the Impact Philanthropy Application Program. And I guess as the name suggests, we are absolutely 100% focused on impact philanthropy. So impact philanthropy is about philanthropy which contributes towards positive social, cultural, and environmental change. We work with our clients every day, the families and the individual philanthropists, to identify the change that they really want to see in the world. And then we partner with them to invest in and partner with organisations who are on the ground, who have the capacity and the capability to be actually affecting that change. So because IPAP is the grant-making vehicle for such a wide variety of trusts, foundations, and endowments, IPAP itself is completely program agnostic. What we're interested in is ensuring that our clients are investing in organisations who have the capacity and the capability to do what they set out to do and to really achieve impact. So you can see from this slide the sector split of funding that was granted in 2021. We do have a much more detailed kind of in-depth look at some of the data from our 2021 IPAP grant round, and that will be released via our Impact newsletter in the coming weeks, so look out for that. IPAP is an incredibly competitive program. We receive around about 1,500 applications each year. Typically just under 20% of those, or 1 in 5, is successful, with the average grant size, usually around $75,000 to $80,000. So I hear a lot of organisations calling me distraught that they weren't successful in the first year or the second year or the third year even that they're applying. And my key, I guess, message is it is incredibly competitive, but it is worth continuing to apply to and making sure that your hat's in the ring, so to speak, so that we can make sure that we can work with you to build the strength of your application and put you in front of our philanthropy clients. So as I mentioned, IPAP is program agnostic, but in addition to that, we are almost entirely organisationally focused. So what that means is that our application process focuses on organisational capability rather than programmatic detail. So when we're assessing applications, we're looking at these 4 key pillars: strategy, leadership, capability, and outcomes. And I guess I really do want to spend some time on this slide and emphasise the point and go through it in detail, because this forms the backbone of everything that we do through IPAP. So we're looking for organisations who have clarity of mission, who have the governance and the leadership to chart and navigate a path towards that mission. Organisations who have a stable and sustainable business model to walk that path. And lastly, but by no means least, we are looking for organisations who are engaged in monitoring, evaluation and learning, and who are really committed to continuous learning, to learn, to grow from mistakes, and who understand what and how any given project, program, intervention is impacting the beneficiary cohort. So as much as I don't want to be the guy that just sits here and reads out this slide to you, I'm absolutely going to do that now because, as I said, it is really key. So when we're talking about strategy, we're looking for organisations that can speak to their mission, understand how effective they are and how they are performing against that mission. So this is probably the single most important factor that I see in assessing the strength of an application. We all know that in the not-for-profit sector, mission drift is far too easy and far too common, where we want to be all things to all people. We're desperately chasing funding and we say yes to things. But through IPAP, what we're really looking for is that clarity of mission and clarity of strategy of how the organisation is actually pursuing that mission. We want to know not only that you can see the end goal and you know what that end goal is, but how you're going to get there. When we're talking about leadership, we're looking for organisations that have an awareness of their external environment and a willingness to learn, collaborate with other organisations in pursuing their goals. So we want to see that an organisation has the board, has the executive, and has the leadership to actually navigate the sector, to partner with other organisations, to see where the gaps are, to collaborate and to lead that organisation again on that path towards mission. When capability is assessed, we're looking for organisations that understand what a sustainable business model looks like to them and how it's measured. So ultimately, we're looking to see that the organisations that we're investing in have the strength and stability to be sustainable, to be actually creating impact for the long term. We want to know that if we're investing in them, that they're not going to be falling over at the first hurdle. And lastly, outcomes. When we talk about outcomes, we're looking for organisations that can demonstrate evidence of success that's measurable, that's realistic, that can provide our clients with a really clear picture of the long-term impact of funding. And this is, this is probably my personal bugbear. People that know me know that I can probably speak on this topic for goodness knows how long, and I'll spare you all that today. But really what we're trying to get at behind this, and this is probably where a lot of organisations fall over in the application process, is we want to see the so what behind your program. We want to see the blue sky. We want to see the world peace. We want to see the end to poverty. We want to see the ultimate reason why you're investing in the intervention that you're investing in and how that's going to contribute to it. We're not saying you need to draw a direct causal link between your little project and world peace in 6 months or a year, but we want to see what that causal link looks like, and we want to see how you're making that contribution. We also, it's really important that we can see that as an organisation, everyone's favourite word is that we're pivoting. We want to know that organisations are able to learn from their mistakes, grow from their successes. They're able to adapt, change, grow in order, again, to really be pursuing that mission. So these are the 4 pillars that we base our assessment on. And what that means for you when you're looking at our assessment form is that entire front end of the application form should be focused on these 4 key areas. We're looking for amazing organisations who are achieving impact, and that is what your application is going to be assessed upon. So when filling out those applications, really make sure you're focusing on that front end and focusing on these 4 key pillars. So when I'm talking about applications, practically, this is what it looks like. This is what the Perpetual IPAP program looks like. Applications open in October. This year it's October the 25th. And they'll be open for about 6 weeks. As I mentioned, we usually receive around about 1,500 applications in that time. And for that reason, I will not be contactable during that time. So if you have a question, if you want to speak to someone, please get in touch with us, myself, with Jill or Austin prior to the 25th of October, because after that, we don't have the capacity to speak to every organisation. Then from December to January, we undertake an eligibility review to ensure that all applicants have ACNC registration, DGR1 status, and that they're eligible to receive funding. We also check to see if applicants have any outstanding acquittals from past funding, as that will also render your application ineligible. So do make sure you check your past grants from us and have all of those acquittals up to date. We then assess each and every application based on the factors that I've just kind of gone through. We also, you'll be very pleased to hear, we have a specialist medical research assessment panel, which separately assesses all of our medical research applications from a scientific research methodological perspective. You don't want me looking at those applications, but we have a very, very expert panel that does that. Each application is then given a score between a 0 and 5. So applications that don't receive at least a 3 are notified usually about February, and just let know that they haven't scored highly enough for us to recommend them for funding. I guess it's important to understand that as a trustee company, Perpetual has that fiduciary responsibility to be recommending applications that score really well against our criteria. So unfortunately, unless your application scores at least a 3, we won't be taking that through to the kind of next phase, which is where we match it with our specific trusts and foundations and put it in front of our clients. So I guess the important kind of takeaway there is that you need to put that focus on your application to ensure that your application scores well. The better it scores, the more clients we can show it to, and the more strongly we can recommend it. So then after that, we kind of March, April, May, we go through a huge jigsaw kind of matching process, matching applications to the areas of philanthropic intent for each of our trusts and foundations. So we look at sector, we look at geography, we look at demographic, amount requested, a huge range of things to provide each of our clients with a short list of really strong, high scoring applications which match their areas of charitable intent. We then sit down with each and every one of those clients and go through formal meetings to go through the applications in detail and ultimately make funding decisions. And as I'm sure you're all very aware, we then notify you probably on the 29th of June that you're going to receive some funding at the 30th of June, and the project has to start on the 1st of July. So, we're not asking too much in terms of time frame. So a couple of, I guess, quick points in summary, and I've got the dates up there for you. My first point is, again, please check the website, have a look at the resources. They really are very useful. Secondly, I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of or are very aware of or have received funding from the Percy Baxter Charitable Trust, which is one of the several charitable trusts that we manage. Percy Baxter Charitable Trust does have a specific focus on the Geelong and Ballarat region, and the process, whilst we still use this exact same process, we also have the amazing Austin Patterson and Jill Hill, who are our local eyes and ears on the ground. And really it's Jill and it's Austin that have that. I rely on their local knowledge, their expertise, and their relationships with all of you to provide those funding recommendations. So I provide them with a short list of every application that relates to the Geelong Ballarat region. And then they spend a huge amount of time going out and speaking to all of you. So again, I really strongly encourage you all to reach out to Jill and Austin and make sure you're engaging with them around our process. That is everything from me. I'll make sure that these dates can be sent out to you all and you get copies of them. But I will now, speaking of the wonderful Jill and Austin, pass over to Austin to speak in a little bit more detail about Percy Baxter.
Thanks very much, Emily. And I am speaking on behalf of Jill and myself. And it's great to see so many people coming along today. Thank you for making your time available, and it's terrific for us to be able to get the messages across. I think I would start off simply by saying the points that Emily made in terms of the perpetual process are just critical. And we find, Jill and I have found that even some of our largest, most sophisticated organisations in Geelong, unfortunately, perhaps haven't looked at the Perpetual website and looked at the videos and so forth, and don't score well, and so are not in a position then to be considered by the number of trusts that Perpetual manages. Just by way of a tiny bit of background, Percy Baxter and his wife both had very close connections with Geelong and Ballarat. And when they established the trust, they recommended that 40% of the distribution would go to be shared between Ballarat and Geelong. And that's normally in excess of about $1.3 million. Last year, lots of you sadly missed out because of COVID and investments and so forth. The distribution was considerably lower. The advisory committee is a really important part of the Perpetual and Percy Baxter process. And it's worth noting that that was established by Russell Baxter, Percy's son, and has been providing advice to the trustees for probably about 40 years. Jill and I receive all the applications, as Emily says, from Ballarat and Geelong, and make recommendations to the 3 trustees who are based in Sydney. And 2 of the trustees are members of the Baxter family, and the 3rd trustee is Perpetual. You're very welcome to be in touch with Jill and me. However, we will certainly make contact with applicants in February, March next year as part of the review process. Also, if I could just ask you, Jill and I find it really helpful when you do submit your applications to send us by email, and Sam's going to put all these details up a bit later on. If you would email a copy of your application to us when you submit it to Perpetual. That's probably all I really need to say specifically about Percy Baxter Trust. Jill, is there anything else that
yes, no,
we
that's
should mention?
no, that's good. Yeah.
Okay. So then I am now passing the baton on to Will, I think, from Equity Trustees.
Thanks so much, Austin and Jill, and thank you so much, Emily and Pat, for presenting your messages. I've got quite a jam-packed slide deck to share with you, and I'm going to be conscious to stick to time because we've got some questions, Q&A at the end. But before I get underway, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm presenting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people also, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and very conscious that I walk on Aboriginal land each and every day. My presentation is absolutely relevant for those of you working in the charitable space and involved in speaking with major donors or applying for grants. And the presentation that I have is kind of a merging together of 2 sort of 1.5 hour sessions that we run at Equity for the sector about both what we call active philanthropy, giving major donors, and grant applications. So there's quite a bit of content. So I encourage you to put your questions in the chat box or ask them at the end. I'll also be circulating a grant scorecard, which is a sort of something that is a tool for you to use post this event to measure your own application processes and applications. But before we get underway, this is the team at Equity, and I like to put this up just really because it paints a picture of who we are. A lot of us come from the sector, a lot of us are former fundraisers, a lot of us sit on boards of full purpose organisations, and we absolutely apply that knowledge when we are speaking with funders, when we're speaking with organisations and our clients. And this was, of course, in the days when we were able to be more than 1.5 metres closer to each other, so that was good. Last financial year, we distributed $96 million by about 3,600 grants. And my area within the team is to work with our active philanthropists. Those are people funding during their life as opposed to within their will. And so we support about 250 active philanthropists at Equity. But what does the role of an intermediary do? A trustee company. Essentially, we represent multiple family foundations, both people giving during their life as well as those that commenced during their will. And similar to Perpetual, we started about 135 years ago. We shape and support the philanthropic goals of our clients, often into perpetuity. And to that end, we research, recommend, and introduce organisations to our clients. And it's fair to say that a lot of us in the team, absolutely myself included, have broad knowledge about the for-purpose sector, but we rely on you as the experts on the ground to connect those dots for us around, what is the problem and solution and outcome that you're working towards within your own specified area. Pat, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because absolutely Pat nailed it at the top of the session. But when COVID really started hitting Australian shores, we took the approach of just listening to the sector. And overwhelmingly, the response was demand has risen, demand for our service has risen, and revenue has fallen. So to that end, we needed to be quite flexible. And that was flexibility in terms of the administration, as Pat very rightly pointed out, but also reapportioning funding where that was possible. So, if there was a program that was no longer going ahead and you needed to kind of keep the lights on, we really wanted to chat about that. And we collaborated both external to equity trustees with other funders, but also internal, so that sort of intra-collaboration. And that, again, to some of the data that Pat put up, that really has painted a way forward for us to continue to work so that we can share due diligence, share applications among the 650, 700 trusts that we manage, equity trustees. And we were a signatory to the response that PA put together. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but really I just wanted to, I'm going to point back to it a couple of times, but really the key message is a lot of the philanthropy ecosystem in Australia exists, similar to an iceberg, exists under the water of that iceberg. And so we certainly represent some of the things that are below the water, but also some of the things that are at that tip of the iceberg and visible. And I'll kind of point back to why that's relevant. But you can think of equity trustees, philanthropy in sort of two different halves. Testamentary trust that were created within someone's will, and active philanthropy that was created during someone's life. So a testamentary trust will have a trustee that's its kind of legal document for operation, and that will spell out what it can and can't donate to, how it can and can't invest, and perhaps its lifetime. And so we call that, particularly on the giving side, that discretion or non-discretion. So discretion, it can donate to charities within a defined group. And so that might be children's charities in the Geelong region created before 1986. So that might be a defined group that we can work with, or non-discretion being it can only support charity number 1 and charity number 2. And there may also be some will maker instructions that sit behind that as well. All of that feeding into a grant framework that we carry out, as I say, often into perpetuity. Active philanthropy is a little bit different. Individuals come with their own individual journey. And a lot of my clients have experienced family tragedy and kind of reflect that in their philanthropy, but they're also open to new ideas. And we are also seeing some of the next generation coming through and having changing some of the conversation at the table. So probably more relevant for testamentary trust, here's some kind of grant writing tips that I can impart to you. And again, there will be a grant scorecard that I circulate after this session. So before a proposal, critical to understand what is the trust trying to achieve? What is the funder trying to achieve? What is their granting strategy? And do you align to that? How can you engage with the funder prior to launching, to submitting an application? What is the appropriate kind of communication mechanism? And how are decisions made? And that may depend on the type of trust it is. So to that end, we're going to go from right to left here. Testamentary trusts can either be, as we've said, non-discretionary, discretionary. If they're non-discretionary, unless you're that organisation, you probably won't know about it, and it will sit below the water in that iceberg analogy. If they're discretionary, they're probably after a grant proposal, and it may be open to the public, and again in the iceberg, sitting at the top of the tip of the iceberg, or it may be kind of by invitation. So hypothetically, children's charities in Geelong region created before 1986 might be 4 organisations. So in that instance, we might approach those 4 organisations and say, hey, would you like to apply for this particular grant? And so we wouldn't necessarily list that on our website because it's for a defined group. Sub-funds are donor advised, and I would say for us, in the main, they exist in an informal process. A lot of them, some do, but a lot of them don't review kind of formal grant applications. And private ancillary funds probably tend more towards being a formal application process than sub-funds, but there is also a mix of both in there too. So at the proposal stage, critical, and this is some basic advice, but critical to read the guidelines. And even though that's basic, it's still worth putting up. And I'd encourage you to be in the headspace to think critically about the guidelines. And I know being a former grant applicant when I was working at a children's charity, and in fact going through the IPAP process, you're looking for where you do align, but I'd encourage you to take the view as well and say, well, where do I really align? View that critically. Do I really align? Who is going to be reading your application? Is it a family? Are there next generation present at the family table? Is it a board of co-trustees? Is it a group of philanthropic professionals? And what's your internal ROI? Are you a 1 or 2 person organization that's going to sink 10 hours into an application that has 2 or 3 or 4% likelihood of coming off? That's also a really important question to ask yourselves. This slide tracks quite nicely to the scorecard, which I will, as I said, I'll send around. But this is some of the criteria that some funders can work with, and certainly it's something that we, not in all instances, but in broad strokes comments that we can work with. So do we have the ability to fund it? If we've received an application to a private ancillary fund from a non-DGR1 entity who doesn't have an auspicing partner, it's a fairly quick conversation in that we cannot fund that entity. We then move on to budget feasibility. Have they painted an accurate picture of the budget? Is it enough to solve the problem that they're looking to solve, or perhaps have they undercooked it a little? Is there any other philanthropic or other funding that can be leveraged? Will it achieve the impact based on those first 2 points? Will it achieve the impact that they've desired? Does it have enough reach? Is the organisation a quality organisation? Does it have a quality leadership, robust governance and compliance structures? And are there any other factors like, has it been funded by a major other funder and gone through their kind of due diligence process and been given the tick of approval? Now we move to active philanthropy. And I'm going to be very conscious of time. So my top tips for active philanthropy, albeit you might call that major donor stewardship, is understand philanthropic structures. I think when I was working for a global children's charity, probably one of the last things on my to-do list was read the private ancillary fund guidelines and kind of bury myself in that detail. But I can absolutely guarantee it'll add value to your stewardship when you understand how those structures work. For example, anyone in a private ancillary fund has claimed their tax deduction. And so it's very unlikely that a tax appeal is going to be relevant to them, and therefore stewarding them with a tax appeal is kind of a moot point. Understanding their giving strategy and motivations. Each philanthropist will come in with their own individual journey, and part of my role is to encourage them to create mission statements, vision statements, and so we can kind of see where there is an alignment. Come with a long-term view. I would have said it's about a 12 to 18 months. Pre-COVID, it's about a 12 to 18 month, period of time to form that relationship. And I would suggest, because of investment markets, it's a little bit longer now. Understand who else is involved. Are there intermediaries, wealth managers, lawyers, family, trusted friends? Who else is at the table that may have some degree of influence on a conversation or an application? Research the philanthropist. Obviously, some people their professional lives are quite public, and that may feed into the next point, which is it may give you an idea about how they would like to be communicated with. Perhaps several micro communications throughout the year, or one major update towards the end of the year. And if you're lucky enough to have a sophisticated CRM backend, I'd encourage you to kind of segment your clients that way. We kind of operate on listing our opportunities in a one-by-one manner where there is relevance to do so. And so the website there, eqt.com.au/grant funding, is where we list our grant opportunities. So I would put that in your diary to kind of check that on a sort of fortnightly or monthly basis, because each grant opportunities pop up all the time. This gives us the ability to build a connection between the organisation, the charity that's received funding, and the specific trust and the co-trustees or the family that's been behind it. What we really want to be able to do is create multi-year funding, deep partnerships with a shared mission. That's absolutely where we're heading. And so, I've put up 5 opportunities that are relevant to these aren't exclusively the only 5 opportunities that are relevant to the Geelong region, but these are some of coming up over the next 12 months. So Alfred Felton, known mostly for its work with the NGV. However, they do have a small grants program tackling disadvantage with an interest in women and girls. The ANZ community has sort of 4 focus areas: housing, financial, environment, and then other, which is essentially anyone with a DGR1. And then Wicking has an aging and aged care focus. William Buckland Foundation, one of the largest trusts in Australia, has an agriculture, vulnerable Victorians, improving health and empowering education focus. And Vertel Foundation, Queensland-based, often known for its work in medical research in Queensland. However, they have a medical awards focus that is able to be applied nationally. Moving to some philanthropic trends in my last few minutes of the presentation before we open up for questions. Obviously, the COVID-19 has affected investment markets. And so we have seen some of our active philanthropists, but also testamentary trusts, take perhaps the opposite view to a risk averse view, which is instead of kind of doing, 1-year commitments and just seeing how the rest of the financial year plays out, they're actually doubling down with their existing partnerships and offering multi-year partnerships with organisations that they know well. Some of our active philanthropists are distributing more than they required, and that's also true of some of our testamentary trusts where there is ability to do so. I don't need to spell this out for all of you on the call because you're all on the ground experiencing this, but there has been significant issues that have arisen from COVID-19: joblessness, homelessness, food insecurity, domestic violence, the list goes on. And so some of our philanthropists are responding with untied grants, capacity building type grants. And they are collaborating with one another to reduce the burden on charities. We saw about 30% of our active philanthropists reposition their funding from what they were doing to more of a kind of a COVID response, that sort of joblessness, homelessness, etc. There is a visible and experienced disadvantage. There has been visible and experienced disadvantage. Disadvantage is not necessarily new, of course, but the experience of it has been new. All of us in Victoria have experienced lockdowns, unless you're lucky enough to run into the NT or something like that. So the way that philanthropists have experienced the last 18 months has given them an insight into mental health, has given them insight to job insecurity. If they're, university-aged children got let go from their hospitality job kind of thing. And it gave them an insight into how quickly things can unfold. And so a lot of people are choosing to start their journey in philanthropy now. Also, a lot are choosing to reposition their philanthropy to more of a kind of a human services type lens. This is sort of my second to last slide. There has been some real structural issues, both on the funding side and also on the for-purpose side, that are becoming evident. And so there is a real interest in the pay-what-it-takes type philanthropy model. Now, what does the problem cost to fix? Is the organisation that's addressing it investing enough in themselves to fix that problem? And can philanthropists respond with kind of a trust-based relationship with that organisation? There's also a real interest in community-led design. And so I would say no longer is kind of a working group off to the side of people with lived experience enough. I would say people with lived experience and a community-led approach right throughout the process, from design to implementation to evaluation, is really what people are starting to look for. The next generation are becoming active, and that's changing the conversation at family dinner tables. And I would say there's a stronger contemporary focus on giving. And I use the word contemporary in the context of 135 years at Equity Trustees. So things like First Nations justice, climate action, all those sorts of things weren't things that some people were considering in 1905 when a lot of our trusts were established. Lastly, lockdown has provided some time to reflect. Philanthropists have had time to sit down and consider their giving strategies. and their giving strategies are becoming clearer, which makes it easier for that alignment, that mission to mission alignment. But it also sometimes means that their focus is becoming narrower but deeper. Instead of supporting 20 organizations from different backgrounds, they're supporting 5 of a similar kind of mission. And so that's what some of the things that we're starting to see on the ground. Those are my details. I encourage you to have a look at our annual giving review, which is on our website. It will detail our journey, our own journey towards impact. It details some of the funding that we've done over the last 12 months. And it also has all of our contact details in the back of it, as well as the trust that we manage, because we truly want to engage with the sector, noting all of the points that I've raised in this. So I think I'm now passing over to Pat for some Q&A.
Brilliant presentations. So well presented and organized. I'm taking massive notes. So thank you. And I think at this stage, I saw one question that popped out. I haven't seen another, but Shirley Culhane, is it? Your question about, are you still there somewhere, Shirley? I'm looking on page 1 and I don't see you. But the question is about giving. So I think it was back to when I was talking, but giving is in response to our values, and these seem to be changing across much of Australia. We need to consider why people give. If you're in the room and you want to unmute, I'd be curious to hear a bit more.
Yeah, that's me.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Shirley.
Yeah, I was just thinking because our community is changing, and the base values that motivate us as people and the choices we make are based on the underlying values that we have. And so I think as people that are talking to philanthropists, I'd encourage you to consider that, because not everyone comes from the same cultural value, heritage or position. And so when those values shift, you might actually find it a different conversation is needed to talk about philanthropy, because if my culture says that my family is everything, or shame and honour is the driver behind who I am, rather than a right or wrong, or a do good for others, or a, the Commonwealth type value, I would encourage you to think about those things that will feed into that conversation, because it looks like most of us are white Westerners here, and so we have a heritage that has certain values. But if you were to talk to someone, for example, from an Asian country, their underlying value system may not be the same as ours, and so you'd need to consider that in your conversation, because it's like the iceberg thing. Our behaviours on top are the top of the iceberg, but the bit underneath are our values and beliefs about all sorts of things. I'm not talking about religious beliefs, I'm talking about beliefs about all sorts of things. And so when you address someone from a culture that is different from ours, the iceberg underneath will be very different. So that's what I was just alerting you to.
Very insightful. Thank you, Shirley. Because it's interesting when you, when any of us, if you've worked with philanthropic consultants, and really Emily and Will would be all across this because you'd be doing it in your day jobs. But when they sit down with a family foundation, for example, and the next gen is in the room and they want to have a values-based conversation around what drives their giving, there's some great, outlines and programs for how you can step a family through that values discussion, so they ultimately decide what's important to them and what motivates their giving. So, but that's a really good point in terms of how even at PA, when we look at trying to grow giving nationally, how to frame that. Storytelling is always an idea to bring something to life, but the right stories to bring out the right sort of behavior. And so thank you for that really good advice. Cynthia, Shira, you said something. Do you want to unmute?
Sure. Pat.
More fun if we're talking. I never picked on you.
I just know that when I work with organizations, and as someone who for a long time before working in a philanthropic organization myself, I was in a charitable organization, that finding the, the part of philanthropy that's under the iceberg, the part that really isn't seen, how do charitable organizations actually go about finding them, identifying them? Like, how do they make those connections? What are the ways that you can do that?
Anyone?
I'm happy to have a first pass at that. So I think it's about connecting with, the first point I'd say is some of it's under the iceberg because it isn't relevant to be above the iceberg. If it only applies to 4 organizations, it's only relevant for us to contact those 4 organizations, and we don't necessarily need to engage with 50. So there's a place for under the iceberg, I suppose, is what I'm saying. The other thing I would certainly, I gravitate towards the houses of philanthropy. So those are the trustee companies, of the community organizations, anywhere where philanthropists gather to establish a giving vehicle, and gravitate towards them and see whether or not you can strike up a conversation. I know from an equity perspective, we're certainly receptive to that conversation, noting that there are 26,500 DGR1 organizations, and I wish I had that many clients, but unfortunately we don't. We need to grow the pie, and we need that slip slap campaign, Pat.
Yeah, we do. It'll be good. Now, Zoe Waters, to everyone, Will, you mentioned to ask who will be reading your application. What's the best way, and who's the best person to ask this question of?
Again, so part of it can be asking whoever. So if you're dealing with me, for example, and I've said I've got a client that's interested, a perfectly reasonable question is, what is the trust structure? Is it a private ancillary fund? Is it a sub fund? Is it a trust within a will? And is there a board of co-trustees, or is it being read by a family? So, certainly asking the question, but you can also, by looking, scrolling through the ACNC, if you know the name of the trust, scrolling through the ACNC or ABN lookup, you can find out what sort of trust it is. And that may give you an indication of maybe who's reading your application. That's things through our lens, but, we obviously don't represent all funders in Australia.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, just from Percy Baxter Trust perspective, as I mentioned, Jill and I read every application, and we'll talk with the majority of applicants next year. But if people really feel that they would like to chat with us during the process, they're very welcome to ring or email either Jill or myself to have a chat about their project or their ideas. So that is one of the benefits, certainly, of having an advisory committee in Geelong and Ballarat for the Percy Baxter Trust.
I think maybe just also to add to what Will was saying, I think Cynthia's question about how can you, find out who is under the water and what that looks like. And I think Will's first point is perfect. A lot of it's under the water because it just no one needs to know about it. There might be a named beneficiary in a will, and that funding, just those distributions go straight to that beneficiary, and that's that. But I think it's really important, as Will mentioned, to engage with the world of philanthropy. PA is a great vehicle for that. And, I'm sure Equity, we certainly have a quarterly newsletter. We host events when we're able to. We, love nothing more than getting a group of people into a room and discussing philanthropy. So I think it's really important for organisations to engage with that world, but also demonstrating achievements and outcomes and impact and shouting it from the rooftops. I mean, we see some great evaluation reports that say X organisation is achieving systematic change in Y by doing, a project that they're working with the community on. And that, pricks all of our ears up. We want to know about that. So making sure you're talking about your achievements, you're shouting them from the rooftops, you're making sure that the community is aware about what you're doing, but not only what you're doing, but the impact that it's having. And philanthropists will start listening. I always say to organisations, and also I come from a not-for-profit background, is don't go begging for money, but deliver a really great program, demonstrate the impact that it had, and funders will come to find you because they want to invest and get on board. So I think there is a little bit of both ways as well, because we're always looking for an organisation that can really, you know, legitimately say this is what we've achieved.
I 100% agree with that, and this is diverging from the question a little bit, but where I've seen funding appeals work really well, or requests for funding work really well, is when an organisation has set their big mission statement, when they've set their big vision statement, and that happens to align with what a funder is doing. And sort of the approach, in a kind of polite way, I suppose, where I've seen it work really well is, you know, this is the rocket ship that we are on as an organisation. We are heading towards this big, massive goal, and we'd love you to join us on this rocket ship. But if you're not, we're going to achieve it with or without you. So, you know, we're going to carry on. That sort of approach, on a personal level, I love.
Yeah, I love that. And it comes down to relationships. And I think both Emily and Will's presentations had the word trust in there. And not just, I mean, the term trustee means a lot just at the core. So there's one last question, and then we need to throw to Gail so that she can wrap up and talk about this important network. And through you may have already answered this, but through the acquittal process, how do the funders manage the measurement of outcomes? I think we already touched on that a bit, but if you have anything else to add, go for it.
I'm happy to start there. I guess our acquittal process is actually pretty high level. We just want to understand that you're spending the money in the way that you said you're spending it, that you didn't, you know, spend it all on a lunch for the CEO or some, you know, Tiffany's watches or something. When we get to measuring outcomes, we really want to see that an organisation has a really strong monitoring, evaluation and learning framework. We will go by what you have in place, and we want to see what those indicators are, how you're tracking against those and how you're measuring it. So we really rely on the frameworks of organisations to be able to say, this is what we set out to do, this is how we're tracking, this is changed as a result of our findings. So being able to demonstrate that for us is absolutely key. Yeah, brilliant.
I think someone is unmuted. It might be Leslie, I'm thinking. But we'll go ahead and throw to Gail now. I haven't seen any other questions come through, but we'll go to wrap up now. Or unless, did someone raise a hand? I saw a hand go up. Shirley.
Sorry, I've already got something ready to type in, so I didn't want to delete that. Something that we've been wrestling with is the difference and benefit between an external evaluator and internal evaluation. It sounds like when you're talking about a framework of measurement, do you take seriously when an organisation uses internal reference points to measure and evaluate, and do you weight them less than if an external body does the measuring? Does that make sense?
Probably Emily will. Yeah,
I'm happy to quickly jump in, then We'll have the last word. Look, it really depends, Shirley. There is absolute value in both internal and external. I guess kind of if an external independent evaluation is, you know, a longitudinal study is the absolute gold star, there are absolutely, you know, it's not always possible, and there are absolutely other ways of achieving really effective evaluative processes. So I think as long as it's appropriate for the program, it's well mapped out and there are clear outcomes, outputs, indicators, and the causal links all make sense, then I don't think you need to get too caught up in the question of internal versus external. It really depends on the program.
Thanks so much. That's really helpful.
In the interest of time, I'll just keep my comment quite short. Look, if evaluation and impact measurement can be an incredibly expensive process, and so I suppose it really depends on the resources that you've got as an organisation. And as sort of just a broader comment, there is perhaps a place for philanthropy, for funders to apportion some additional granting funds to that impact measurement of the program, noting that it is an expensive process to go through. So internal or external, on a personal level, my view is work with the resources that you've got.
Good. Thank you for that. That was a great quick discussion. I think some of the questions were targeted and just what we needed. And let's throw to Gail. And if frankly, if there are any other questions, I meant to mention this earlier, go ahead and put it in the chat function if you didn't get to ask something, and we will follow up to you afterwards. But yes, please take it away, Gail.
Thanks so much, Pat. So on behalf of the Geelong Funders Collaborative and my colleagues in that group, can I just start by thanking Pat firstly for again facilitating our session today. And we've had 3 fabulous presentations from organisations that organisations wouldn't normally hear from. So as a collaborative, we're just delighted to bring these opportunities to organisations that do some incredible work here in our region. So sincere thanks to all of you for being a part of today. If there are any burning issues that really haven't come out today and they're sitting inside and you want to engage and get a response, please don't hesitate in emailing me or any member of the Geelong Funders Collaborative, and I'll touch on some detail about who we are and what we're doing shortly. But if you want to get any more information and have that burning question, just drop me an email at the Geelong Community Foundation, just gail@geelongfoundation.org, and I'm happy to facilitate and get the answer for you if that's what you would like. Just in terms of the Geelong Funders Collaborative, for those of you who aren't aware, the Geelong Community Foundation started this group at the end of 2018, and it's just been an absolute delight to work with a fabulous group of colleagues in this region who are all in that funding space. Our objectives really to start with, it was all about gathering knowledge of our community, but also the organisations that are operating in the community and how we could be supportive as a collaborative for organisations in our region. We really wanted to better understand you as organisations. We meet regularly, probably quarterly. We've been meeting at community organisation sites to try and engage directly with some community organisations, which has been absolutely fabulous. We've had guest speakers coming in and talking to us about issues, which is all about our own education and knowledge, which is absolutely critical that we continue to build our own knowledge. So that's been a fabulous outcome of our group. We've also started to facilitate some collaborative funding initiatives and opportunities. So I know Percy Baxter and the Jack Rockoff Foundation recently came together to fund an initiative out at Norlane Community Initiatives. Anthony Costa Foundation and the Geelong Community Foundation partnered to fund a collaborative initiative at Kids Plus Foundation. But we've barely scratched the surface in terms of what might be possible in terms of the collaboration and the group that we've started here in Geelong. So the members of that group at this point in time, the Anthony Costa Foundation, Australian Communities Foundation, the Bendigo Bank, Community Sector Banking, the Dawn Wade Foundation, Geelong Connected Communities, Give Where You Live Foundation, Helen McPherson Smith Trust, the Ian Potter Foundation, Jack Rockoff Foundation, Percy Baxter Charitable Trust, and of course the Geelong Community Foundation. And of course, and that's growing. We are very keen to continue to invite other funders into that network. I think the APCO Foundation is going to join us as well. I think Sharon's here on the call today and we look forward to welcoming her. So it's open to funders in this region so that we can more effectively work together as a group, really at the end of the day to support you. And today's initiative and the initiative that we've run previously is part of that process. The next Funders Forum that we're running is on the 6th of October. So you can pop that into your diaries, once again, starting at 12:30. And the presenters will be Australian Communities Foundation, Jack Rockoff Foundation, the Ian Potter Foundation, and Helen McPherson Smith Trust. So it's going to be another really engaging and interesting session, I'm sure, so that you can obtain more information about funding opportunities that may be available to you to support the work that you do. So we as a group, my colleagues, we love to hear from you. If there's an organisation out there that is trying to be really strategic in terms of an initiative or a project in the region that they're wanting to collaborate with others on, and perhaps want to provide a briefing to the Geelong Funders Collaborative, touch base with us. We're happy to talk to you and perhaps receive a briefing about what you're trying to achieve in our region. So thank you. Great to see so many people in the room. Once again, as I said, if there's any questions or burning issues, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And sincere thanks again to our presenters today, and for Pat for facilitating with her knowledge from that philanthropic sector. So thanks everybody. Great to see you all. Hopefully we'll be in person one day. Thanks. Bye-bye.